Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about the x and y axis, what quadrants are, ordered pairs, x and y intercepts. So this horizontal line here we're going to call x. This is just the real number system, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now we have a copy of that right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Now on the other side, we're going to have like -1, -2, -3, -4. So we have an opposite here. And then down here we have that same thing, so -1, -2, -3, -4, and so on, okay? So if it's to the right, it's positive. If it's up, it's positive. Okay, so all of the numbers here are positive, all right? Now I'm going to call this section, we have 4 sections here, we have quadrants. I'm going to call this quadrant 1, and I'm going to use a Roman numeral to indicate that this is quadrant 1. Okay, so all of the numbers here are positive. So notice I could talk about 2, 3 here. So if I talked about this point right here, right there, that is the point 2, 3. It's 2 for the x, and it's 3 for the y. So there's an x, y right there. Okay. Now, if we look over here, I'm going to call this quadrant 2, Roman numeral 2, and notice that the x's are negative and the y's are positive. Okay. So let's say we want to look at, let's look at this point. So we have this point, and that's -3, 1. Okay. Again, -3 is the x, and y is that 1. All right. Notice that all of the x's are negative and all of the y's are positive in there. Down here, I'm going to call this quadrant 3, Roman numeral 3. Let's take a look at the point, I don't know, -2, -4. Let's look at this point right here. And so this point is -2, -4. Okay, this is an x and a y. And notice that both the x and the y are both negative, okay? If it's in quadrant 3, both of the points are negative. All right, let's look at a point over here. Let's pick a random point. How about this one? So we have 4, -3, x and y. So the x is 4 and the y is -3. And notice that the x is positive and the y is negative, okay? Again, I'm going to call this quadrant 4. So I use IV in Roman numerals. All right, that means that if you're in quadrant 1, the x is positive and the y is positive. If you're in quadrant 2, then the x is negative and the y is positive. If you're in quadrant 3, they're both negative. And if you're in quadrant 4, it's positive, negative. Okay? So hopefully that kind of helps of what these things are, what's going on. Yeah, so I hope that that's somewhat helpful to you. Now, if I gave you a random point, let's do an example here. If I gave you -100 and positive 126, and I asked what quadrant is that in? Well, the quadrant, notice that this is negative number, this is a positive number for the y, and so we can just go back up here to our cheat sheet, and that's going to have to be in quadrant 2. So I don't even have to graph it, just knowing where, if it's positive or negative, I can determine whether where that is, okay? So I'll get rid of that. Let's look at another example. So if I have something like -100 like last time, and then I'll do -200 for the y. This is a negative number, and this is a negative number. And which quadrant has where both of them are negative, and that's quadrant 3, okay? So that's how you can determine where these things are, even if you don't want to just draw it out. You could just determining, where that is from the sign. Okay, so hopefully that helps you. Now, where is this going to mess up? How about I have the point 0, 2? Okay, well, 0 isn't really positive, and 2 definitely is positive. So where is this? Well, I'm at 0 for the x, and I'm at 2 for the y, so that's this point right here. And that's actually on the y-axis, so that's not in a quadrant at all. So this isn't in a quadrant, that's on the y-axis, okay? And we can again talk about that with the x-axis as well. I'm going to get rid of that. So let's talk about something like 2, 0. This is positive and this is 0. So if it's 2 for the x and 0 for the y, that would be a point right there. And this is on the x-axis, so this isn't a quadrant at all. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to you and that's helpful. So you can have points that are on an axis and not actually in a quadrant at all. All right, now if that is the case, if you have something that's actually on the line, we're going to call this an x-intercept and a y-intercept, especially when we start talking about lines. So if I draw a random line here, this would be its x-intercept, okay? And I know that the y portion of this point is 0, okay, because it's around there. And again, that would be true here. With the y-intercept, I know that x must be 0. So sometimes we see problems where we're actually just given lines. Maybe you're given x plus 2y equals 6, and you're asked, what is the x-intercept? What is the y-intercept? And without even graphing, I know that the y must be 0 if that's true for the x-intercept. So I know that if you just cancel out this 2y here, you're just going to get x equals 6. So I can just write 6. For the y-intercept, well, if x equals 0, then I have 2y equals 6. I can divide by 2. I know that x must equal 0 because it's a y-intercept. You can divide by 2 and you just get 3. Okay, so that's an easy way. You don't even have to graph the line and find it. You can just plug in 0 for which one you're finding, okay? So if you're looking for the x-intercept, you'd plug in 0 for y, again, because the x-intercept, that's y is always going to be 0, and that's true for the y-intercept. X will be 0. X is 0 here, okay? Now, I didn't draw this line. These are just two separate examples, but I wanted to kind of give you that. One other thing I want to mention in this video is what an ordered pair is. So an ordered pair is really just a point, okay? Now, the x always comes first and the y always comes second, and that has to happen. Why? Because we all have to agree so we can understand everyone's work. So we always put x first and y second, and we always count this as the first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, fourth quadrant, okay? So yeah, I think that's probably enough for this video. Most of that is probably review, but we're going to need it for when we move on. And yeah, it's important that we understand this. So reach out if there's anything that I'm not explaining clear enough, but I think that's enough for this video. Okay, I'll see you in the next one.